It's possible that Pachacuti's mummified remains were once located in the cave underneath the Temple of the Sun that Bingham had originally believed was a burial chamber.
When Hiram Bingham returned from Machu Picchu in the early 1910s, the story the world heard was simple. A lost Inca city rediscovered, documented, and safely studied. But behind that clean narrative sat a detail that never made it into textbooks and barely survived in the archives at all. In 1912, just 1 year after Bingham's expedition, Yale received an enormous shipment from Peru. More than 46,000 artifacts pulled from Machu Picchu. Pottery shards, bone fragments, tools, textiles, everything expected from a major archaeological haul. Yet among the crates stacked and logged, 3 stood apart. They carried no catalog numbers, no item lists, no public descriptions, just a vague label indicating they required further analysis. That alone might sound like routine academic caution, but it wasn't. These crates weren't processed with the others. They were moved into a restricted storage area accessible to only a handful of researchers. No photographs were released, no inventory ever surfaced, and over time, references to them grew faint, scattered across internal memos and half-sentences in correspondence that abruptly stopped. What made these 3 crates different enough to isolate? The question grew louder decades later when Peru began demanding the return of its cultural heritage. After years of legal pressure and negotiations, Yale agreed. In 2011, thousands of Machu Picchu artifacts finally went back home. Officials celebrated the transfer as the closing of a long, painful chapter. But quietly, almost invisibly, those same 3 crates never arrived. They weren't listed as returned, they weren't declared missing, they simply vanished from the conversation. No explanation was offered, no correction followed, and when journalists and researchers asked where they were, the answers dissolved into vague references to lost documentation or misidentified storage. In other words, nothing verifiable, nothing final. That silence matters, because missing artifacts don't just represent lost objects, they represent lost context. If those crates held items that didn't fit the accepted story of Machu Picchu, removing them would instantly make the site easier to explain, cleaner, safer, less disruptive. And there's another detail that makes this harder to ignore. Bingham himself hinted that something wasn't right. In private notes written just 2 years after the expedition, he mentioned finding implements on the lowest terraces that didn't resemble known Inca tools. He wrote that a metallurgist had been consulted, testing was planned, results were expected, yet nothing was ever published. No paper, no appendix, no footnote quietly correcting the record. Just a trail that stops cold, as if the conclusion wasn't meant to leave the room it was discovered in. The disappearance of those crates didn't end a mystery, it started one, and it set a pattern that would repeat again and again at Machu Picchu. Discovery followed by excitement, excitement followed by silence, and silence followed by denial. And once you see that pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee, because the crates weren't the last thing to be quietly locked away, they were only the beginning.
What happened to the 3 missing crates wasn't an isolated mistake or a clerical error. It marked the beginning of a pattern, one that repeats so consistently at Machu Picchu it starts to feel intentional. In 1914, Hiram Bingham wrote something curious in his personal journal. While surveying the lowest terraces of Machu Picchu, he came across implements made from material he couldn't immediately identify. These weren't decorative objects or broken fragments. They were tools, practical, functional, and unfamiliar. Bingham noted that the items didn't resemble standard Inca copper or bronze tools. Concerned enough to pause fieldwork, he arranged for metallurgical testing. A specialist was contacted, samples were prepared. According to the journal, results were expected soon. They never came. No follow-up paper was published, no technical appendix appeared in later reports, and no explanation was offered for why the findings vanished. It was as if the moment the question became too difficult, the conversation simply stopped. The metallurgist involved was Dr. Harold Wentworth, a Yale-affiliated specialist active during that era. His laboratory notes, if they still exist, were sealed within Yale's internal archives. Requests to review them were denied as recently as the late 1980s, with the official reason being restricted academic material. That explanation raises eyebrows. By that point, the work was over 70 years old. There were no commercial secrets to protect, no national security concerns, just data. And yet access was still blocked. This wasn't about one scientist or one lab. It reflected a broader tendency. Findings that complicated the narrative didn't move forward, and this pattern didn't fade with time. It grew stronger. In 1968, nearly half a century later, a construction crew working near Cusco uncovered a sealed chamber beneath an ancient Inca road. Inside were metal tools that didn't align with known Inca metallurgy. The shapes, density, and wear suggested a manufacturing method outside the accepted technological technological range of the civilization. At first, there was excitement. Then came the silence. The chamber was resealed. No peer-reviewed studies followed. No museum display ever mentioned the discovery. Even local records barely acknowledged it. Another question quietly removed from the table. Across decades, the rhythm stayed the same. Something unexpected surfaced, curiosity spiked, then access narrowed, documentation stalled, and discussion evaporated. It's not the absence of discoveries that's strange. It's what happens after they're made. Because in archaeology, disagreement is normal. Debate is expected. But when evidence consistently disappears instead of being challenged, something else may be happening. And as this cycle repeated, it began to leave behind a trail, not of answers, but of locked doors. Doors that would appear again much deeper underground. By the late 1960s, the pattern was no longer subtle. It had become unmistakable. In 1968, a construction crew working outside Cusco was cutting near an ancient Inca road when their tools broke into something hollow. Beneath the stonework lay a sealed chamber, deliberately closed off in antiquity. Inside were metal tools, intact, heavy, and unlike anything typically associated with Inca craftsmanship. These weren't ceremonial objects. They showed wear, purpose, repeated use. What made them unsettling was this: their composition and form didn't match known Inca metallurgy. The Incas were masters of copper and bronze, but these tools suggested something different, possibly harder alloys, possibly techniques not officially attributed to Andean cultures of that era. At first, word spread quickly among local archaeologists. There was excitement, curiosity, even urgency. Then everything stopped. The chamber was resealed. No excavation report was published. No follow-up analysis was announced. The discovery slipped into obscurity, mentioned only in fragmented accounts and second-hand references. Another door closed before anyone could ask the obvious question: who made these and when? Decades later, the same thing happened again, this time directly beneath the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu. In 2001, ground-penetrating radar scans revealed something unexpected beneath the temple's foundation: a void, a hollow space large enough to be a chamber, not a crack or natural pocket. Its shape appeared intentional, structured, and aligned with the building above. The implications were enormous. The Temple of the Sun is one of the most sacred and carefully constructed buildings at Machu Picchu. An underground chamber beneath it could suggest ritual use, burial practices, or something even older incorporated into later Inca construction. Archaeologists requested excavation permits. They were denied. The official explanation was preservation. Disturbing the structure, authorities said, could risk damage. That argument might sound reasonable until you realize excavation wasn't the only option. Non-invasive exploration was available. Fiber optics, advanced scanning, micro-drilling, all were proposed, all were refused. Once again, the response wasn't debate or testing, it was a firm stop. What makes this harder to dismiss is consistency. Different decades, different technologies, different researchers, same outcome. Discover something that complicates the story and access disappears. And with each sealed chamber, the unanswered questions multiply. Was the void beneath the Temple of the Sun a burial site, a ritual chamber, a remnant of an earlier structure the Incas built on top of, or something even more disruptive to the accepted timeline? We don't know, because no one is allowed to look. And that refusal does more than protect stone. It protects a narrative. Because if Machu Picchu contains layers beneath layers, physically and historically, then the site may not belong to a single moment in time. It may be the result of inheritance, not invention. And that possibility leads directly to the stones themselves. Stones whose precision and wear patterns raise questions that sealed chambers alone cannot answer. Long before radar scans and sealed chambers entered the debate, the stones themselves were already raising uncomfortable questions. At nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, Machu Picchu sits in terrain so steep and unstable that modern construction crews would struggle to work there even today. Yet the site is built from massive stone blocks, some weighing more than 50 tons, moved uphill and fitted together with a level of precision that still defies explanation. These stones aren't held together with mortar. They don't need it. The joints are so tight that even a thin blade can't slip between them. Every surface is shaped to lock into the next, distributing weight and resisting earthquakes in a region where tremors are common. This isn't rough construction refined over time. It's deliberate, calculated, and exact. What makes this especially puzzling is what the Incas didn't have. No iron tools, no steel chisels, no wheels, no draft animals capable of hauling massive loads, no written blueprints or technical manuals. Instead, the official
explanation relies on copper tools, stone hammers, rope, and manpower. Yet modern engineers who've studied Machu Picchu admit, often reluctantly, that reproducing this level of accuracy today would require cranes, computer modeling, laser alignment, and diamond-tipped cutting tools. And that's just the stonework. Many structures are aligned with astronomical events to astonishing accuracy. Solstice sunrises strike specific windows. Shadows fall exactly where intended. Stones were placed with millimeter-level precision to track celestial cycles. This implies not just craftsmanship, but advanced planning and mathematical understanding. All of it achieved without written language. That contradiction sits at the heart of the mystery. How does a civilization leave behind one of the most technically sophisticated construction sites on Earth, yet no clear record of how it was done? Some archaeologists suggest lost techniques or extraordinary skill passed through oral tradition. Others argue that generations of labor slowly refined the site. But those explanations begin to strain when you look closely at the details. Not all stones at Machu Picchu look the same. Lower terraces show different wear patterns than upper structures. Some blocks appear far more weathered, as if they've been exposed for much longer. Others look comparatively recent, almost pristine by comparison. The difference isn't subtle, it's structural. This has led to a controversial idea. Machu Picchu may not have been built all at once. Instead, parts of it may be far older, structures inherited, modified, and expanded by the Incas rather than created entirely by them. In this view, the Incas weren't starting from nothing. They were building on top of something already ancient. If that's true, it would explain a lot. The impossible precision, the absence of construction records, the strange tools that don't fit known Inca metallurgy, and the resistance to digging deeper, both literally and academically. Because if the stones themselves don't match the timeline, then the timeline may be wrong. And that realization pushed some researchers to look beyond archaeology, turning to geology for answers that would prove even harder to accept. When stonework raises questions, geology tends to answer them quietly, patiently, and without regard for historical tradition. And at Machu Picchu, the geology told a story few were prepared to hear. In 2013, Robert Schoch, a geologist known for controversial but methodical erosion research, examined Machu Picchu's terraces with a straightforward goal: determine how long the stone surfaces had been exposed to the elements. Not who built them, not why, just how long water and weather had been at work. What he found immediately conflicted with the accepted timeline. The lower terraces displayed erosion patterns consistent with prolonged water exposure, rounded edges, deep channels, and weathering signatures that do not form in a few centuries. According to geological standards, this level of erosion typically requires thousands of years, not the roughly 600 years suggested by the conventional Inca construction date of around 1450. Water erosion of this depth doesn't happen quickly, even in the Andes. Seasonal rainfall alone isn't enough. The stone would have needed to sit exposed for far longer than history allows. Even more telling was the contrast. Upper structures showed far less erosion. Their edges were sharper, their surfaces better preserved, and their masonry style differed slightly, suggesting a separate construction phase. The implication was hard to ignore. Machu Picchu wasn't built in a single moment in time. It appeared layered. Older foundations below, newer additions above. When Schoch compiled his findings and submitted them to academic journals, the response wasn't debate. It was rejection. Not because of flawed methodology, not because of missing data, but because the conclusions challenged established chronology. In other words, the evidence didn't fit the story, so the story was protected. This kind of resistance isn't uncommon in science, especially when foundational timelines are at stake, but the implications here were enormous. If parts of Machu Picchu are thousands of years older than believed, then the Incas may not have been the original builders. They may have been caretakers, inheriting and modifying an ancient complex whose true origins were already lost to time. Geology doesn't care about cultural boundaries. It records exposure, pressure, and time. And at Machu Picchu, it suggests a history far deeper than textbooks allow. These findings connect directly back to the sealed chambers, the missing artifacts, and the unexplained tools. Together, they form a pattern that points in one direction. The site's true story is layered, complicated, and uncomfortable. And when geology starts rewriting history, resistance often follows, not just in academic journals, but in access itself. Because the more these questions grew, the more doors seemed to close. By the time geological evidence began raising alarms, researchers turned to a safer alternative, non-invasive technology. If digging was off-limits, scanning could still reveal what lay beneath the stones, or so they thought. In 2009, a documentary crew working near the Intihuatana stone reported something they couldn't explain. As cameras rolled, electronic equipment began to malfunction. Compasses spun erratically. Batteries drained faster than normal. The crew documented magnetic disturbances localized around the stone, anomalies strong enough to disrupt instruments, but inconsistent with known geological causes. The footage never aired. No official explanation was offered. The incident was quietly dismissed, and requests to repeat the measurements under controlled conditions went nowhere. Another anomaly logged, then shelved. A few years later, attention shifted underground. In 2001, ground-penetrating radar had already revealed a void beneath the Temple of the Sun. By the late 2010s, technology had advanced far beyond simple radar. New methods could map subsurface structures in high resolution without disturbing a single stone. One of the strongest proposals came from Julio Valdivia, a respected Peruvian archaeologist. Beginning in 2017, he applied for permits to use lithium atom resonance scanning, a technique successfully deployed at ancient sites around the world to identify hidden chambers, tunnels, and structural voids. The method was safe, non-destructive, widely accepted. His request was denied. He applied again in 2019, denied. Again in 2022, denied, without public explanation. Each rejection cited vague concerns about preservation, despite the fact that the technology posed no physical risk to the site. No counterproposal was offered. No alternative study approved. The answer was simply no. Valdivia continued to push for transparency, arguing that understanding what lies beneath Machu Picchu was essential to protecting it. His persistence earned quiet support among colleagues, but no permits. In 2023, he passed away unexpectedly. His research ended with him. The question he kept asking remains unanswered. Why are modern scientific tools repeatedly blocked from exploring a site that seems to demand exploration? At this point, preservation alone no longer explains the resistance, especially when technology could reduce speculation and replace it with data. Instead, the absence of answers has only amplified suspicion, because when scans are denied, footage withheld, and instruments silenced, it stops looking like caution. It starts looking like control. And that control becomes even more unsettling when paired with the unresolved mystery of advanced metal tools, objects that hint that technology behind Machu Picchu may have been far more sophisticated than officially acknowledged. That missing evidence brings us to the metals themselves, the tools that don't belong, and the knowledge that may have vanished with them. By now, the mystery surrounding Machu Picchu no longer rests on a single anomaly. It rests on what remains unseen and what access keeps being denied. Ground-penetrating radar didn't just suggest cracks or natural gaps. It revealed voids with defined edges and alignments, spaces that look intentional rather than accidental. These aren't random hollows formed by erosion. They resemble chambers, corridors, possibly an underground network integrated into the site's design. That idea alone reshapes everything. If Machu Picchu extends below the surface, then the visible city may only be the upper layer of something much older and far more complex. Ancient builders often hid their most important spaces underground: ritual chambers, burials, repositories of knowledge. And if the Incas inherited the site rather than creating it from nothing, those spaces may predate them by centuries or even millennia. The strongest resistance always appears when attention turns downward. Every attempt to map beneath the Temple of the Sun, every proposal to scan below the terraces, every effort to document anomalies near sacred stones, they all stop at the same barrier. Supporters of restriction argue that speculation fills the gaps where evidence is missing, but that argument cuts both ways, because speculation thrives precisely when evidence is withheld. Open access would end rumors. Data would replace doubt. Instead, we're left with fragments, unofficial claims from researchers who say they've seen partial scan results showing complex subsurface geometry, stories of tunnels that don't match known Inca construction, hints of chambers positioned beneath ritual centers, not randomly scattered. None of this is confirmed, but none of it has been disproven either. And that's the tension. If there's nothing beneath Machu Picchu, scanning would prove it. If there's nothing unusual, transparency would strengthen the official story. The continued refusal to look only suggests uncertainty or fear of what might be found, because what lies underground could challenge more than dates and tools. It could challenge authorship. It could suggest forgotten civilizations, lost knowledge, or a continuity of culture far deeper than modern history allows. Machu Picchu then becomes more than an archaeological site. It becomes a boundary between what we're told we know and what we're not allowed to confirm. And until those depths are explored, the city will remain suspended between wonder and silence. A monument not just to ancient stone, but to unanswered questions. The stones above ground have spoken as much as they can. The truth, it seems, is still waiting below.
After more than a century of discovery, denial, and unanswered questions, one truth has become impossible to ignore. Machu Picchu is not just mysterious because of what we know, but because of what we're not allowed to confirm. Every path leads back to the same crossroads: missing artifacts, locked archives, denied scans, sealed chambers, geological timelines that don't align. Individually, each of these could be dismissed. Together, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. The official story tells us Machu Picchu was built quickly, entirely by the Incas, around the mid-1400s. But the stones suggest deeper time. The erosion suggests far greater age. The tools hint at technology that doesn't belong. And the underground voids imply there is far more to the site than what's visible above ground. What makes this truly unsettling isn't the possibility that the timeline is wrong. History has been revised many times before. What's unsettling is the resistance to look it. If Machu Picchu truly holds nothing that challenges the accepted narrative, then transparency would only strengthen that narrative. Scans would confirm it. Studies would close the debate. Instead, access remains restricted. Questions are deferred, and curiosity is treated as a threat. That suggests uncertainty, not about preservation, but about consequences. Because if Machu Picchu turns out to be older, inherited, or built atop something far more ancient, it would force a rethinking of early civilizations in the Americas. It would challenge assumptions about technological development, cultural continuity, and who possessed advanced knowledge long before recorded history. And that kind of shift doesn't just rewrite textbooks, it reshapes identity. For now, Machu Picchu stands frozen in a carefully maintained version of history, a version that may be incomplete by design. The visible city is celebrated, photographed, and protected, but beneath it lies silence, guarded by policy, caution, and unanswered questions. The mystery isn't whether Machu Picchu still has secrets, it's whether the world is ready to uncover them, because the truth isn't always buried by time. Sometimes it's buried by choice.
At this point, the mystery of Machu Picchu isn't defined by missing answers. It's defined by missing permission. Civilizations all over the world have unanswered questions. Lost cities, damaged records, incomplete timelines. That's normal. What isn't normal is how often Machu Picchu reaches the edge of discovery and then stops. Every time new technology emerges that could clarify the story, it's kept at arm's length. Every time evidence complicates the narrative, it disappears into storage or sealed ground. Every time researchers ask to look deeper, the answer is silence. That silence has consequences, because when history isn't allowed to evolve, speculation fills the vacuum. Doubt grows, trust erodes, and instead of protecting the site, secrecy turns it into a breeding ground for controversy. If Machu Picchu truly fits neatly within the accepted timeline, then openness would end the debate. Data would speak louder than rumors. The refusal to allow that data to exist suggests something far more fragile than stone is being protected: a story. And stories matter, especially ones tied to national identity, global heritage, and humanity's understanding of its own past. Changing them isn't easy. It threatens reputations, careers, institutions, and long-held assumptions. So the safest option becomes delay, deny, defer. But history doesn't stay frozen forever. Eventually, new generations ask the same questions with better tools and less patience. And when they do, the contrast between what is known and what was withheld becomes impossible to defend. Machu Picchu may one day be remembered not just for its breathtaking beauty, but for the moment it forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth: that human history is far older, far more complex, and far less settled than we like to believe. Until then, the city remains suspended between awe and avoidance, visited by millions, understood by few, and guarded not just by stone walls, but by silence. And sometimes silence tells you more than answers ever could. After everything uncovered and everything quietly withheld, one reality stands out. Machu Picchu isn't just an ancient city. It's a question mark carved into stone. For over a century, the world has admired its beauty while skirting its contradictions. Impossible engineering explained away by skill. Geological timelines softened into theory. Missing artifacts reduced to paperwork errors. Denied scans framed as caution. Each decision on its own seems reasonable. Together, together, they form a wall as solid as the stone terraces themselves. What lies beneath Machu Picchu may never be a single shocking discovery, no dramatic reveal, no instant rewrite of history. Instead, the truth may be quieter and more unsettling. A layered past, multiple builders, knowledge passed down, reused, and slowly forgotten. A civilization standing on the shoulders of something far older. And that idea changes everything. Because if Machu Picchu wasn't created in isolation, if it was inherited, adapted, or protected, then human history in the Americas stretches deeper than we've been taught. It suggests that advanced understanding didn't suddenly appear and vanish. It endured, fragmented, and survived in stone. The greatest mystery, then, isn't what archaeologists haven't found. It's what they've chosen not to confirm. Until the ground is scanned freely, the archives open fully, and the questions asked without fear of the answers, Machu Picchu will remain incomplete. Not as a ruin, but as a story paused mid-sentence. Because the stones have already spoken. The science has already whispered. What remains is whether we're willing to listen. And somewhere beneath the terraces, beneath the temples, beneath centuries of silence, the rest of the truth is still waiting.